A Union private weighs 91 pounds in this photograph. He has just come out of Andersonville, and under the leather sweatband of the cap on his lap, for 247 days through the worst Confederate prison of the war, he has been carrying the portrait of a woman who is not his mother, who is not his wife, and who, the family records will tell us many years later, no one in his house ever knew about. She is the size of a fingernail. The conservator who would find her did not find her until 1963, when she lifted the cabinet card from its mount in a Hartford conservation lab, turned it on the bench under a 4-power loop, and noticed a thin, bright sliver of brass under the leather. The Connecticut Historical Society had owned the cap for 25 years by then. No one had taken it off. The man in the photograph is Private Elias Whitcomb, of the 16th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry, captured at Plymouth, North Carolina, in April of 1864, and held at Andersonville from the 21st of May, 1864, to the 11th of April, 1865. The photograph is a cabinet card, 3¼ inches by 4½, mounted on cream-colored pasteboard. The studio mark on the verso, blind stamped into the cardstock and faintly inked over, reads Whitmore and Bond, Annapolis, Maryland. It is dated in pencil, in a hand that is not the photographer's, May 14, 1865. He is sitting. The chair is a studio chair, plain wood. Behind him, a painted backdrop of a balustrade and a column, the kind of thing every wartime studio in the Eastern Theater kept rolled up against the wall for soldier portraits. He wears a Union forage cap on his lap, not on his head. That by itself is unusual. Most soldiers in studio portraits wore the cap to hide hair gone wrong, or to mark themselves clearly as soldiers in the print. He has set it on his thigh, brim turned inward, and he is holding it with both hands as if it might escape if he loosened his grip. His coat is a 4-button sack, dark blue wool, regulation Union infantry. The brass buttons are intact but black with neglect. There is a small piece of brown thread sewn through the second buttonhole from the top, a private's habit, the keep thread, in case a button comes off in the field. His beard is uneven. His skin is the wrong color for a man of 24. The cheekbones rise too sharply against the temple. The eye sockets are too dark. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking just past it, at someone the camera cannot see. I have been looking at this photograph since I first saw it in the spring of 2003, in a wooden cabinet drawer at the Connecticut Historical Society in Hartford. It is one of about 400 wartime portraits in their American Civil War collection. I have been an archivist historian for 21 years, 15 of those on the Civil War period, and I have learned to look at these prints the way a watchmaker looks at a stopped watch. You do not look at the face first. You look at the small things, the thread, the crease, the object held in the lap. You look at what the man brought with him to the photographer, the detail Ruth Adair found in the conservation lab in 1963, and that for 60 years before her, no one had noticed, was a daguerreotype. A 6th-plate daguerreotype by its dimensions, which is the smallest standard format made for the trade. It is tucked under the inside leather sweatband of his forage cap, pressed flat against the crown lining. In the cabinet card, you can just see the edge of its brass mat, no thicker than a fingernail, peeking out from under the leather. The mount is silvered. You see one corner. You see one small, bright sliver. That is all there is in the original print. That is all the camera caught. But Ruth Adair, who was a careful woman and a great conservator, did not stop there. She wrote a note to the Hartford curator. She asked whether the daguerreotype itself could be removed for examination. The curator, after consulting the family donor, said no. The cap, the daguerreotype, and the cabinet card were to be kept together as a single object. The family had been firm on that point in the deed of gift in 1938. Ruth Adair made one black and white reference photograph of the daguerreotype in situ, under raking light, before she returned the items to their case. That reference photograph is in the conservation file. It is enlarged, it is grainy, but it is enough. The daguerreotype shows a young woman, perhaps 18 or 19 years of age, in a high-collared dress with a small lace collar pinned at the throat. Her hair is parted in the center and combed flat to either side, looped at the ears, gathered behind. She is not smiling. Daguerreotype subjects almost never did, because of the exposure time. But she is looking at the camera. Whoever made her portrait, she was looking straight into the lens. Even through 80 years of silver tarnish and the limitations of 1963 reproduction, the eyes are clear. There is one more thing. On the surface of the daguerreotype, in the silvering of the plate itself, there is a small white stain. Ruth Adair noted it as a possible amalgam loss. Lower left, irregular shape, approximately 3 millimeters at greatest dimension. I have looked at this stain a great many times over a great many years. It is not amalgam loss. The shape is wrong. The color is wrong. The shape is a small, uneven crescent, and the color is the dull, cream white of milled grain. I believe, and I cannot prove it, and I will not pretend to, that the stain is a fleck of cornmeal mush. Of Confederate stock crash and cornmeal, ground coarse, served raw or half-cooked, eaten by the man in the cabinet card every day for 247 days at Andersonville prison. I will tell you what the photograph is. I will tell you what I have found. I will tell you what I have not found. Names in this story are changed where families requested. The photograph and its provenance are exactly as I described them. The man in the cabinet card was a private in Company H of the 16th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry. The regiment was raised in Hartford in the summer of 1862 from the towns west of the Connecticut River: Hartford, Bristol, New Britain, Plainville, Glastonbury. They went south in late August, after a single week of drill on Long Hill. At Antietam, 24 days after they were mustered into federal service, they took the field for the first time in the 40-acre cornfield and lost almost a third of their men in a single afternoon. They had been issued unfamiliar imported rifles 2 days before the battle. Several of them did not know how to load. After Antietam, the regiment was sent to the coastal defenses in Virginia and North Carolina. They garrisoned small towns. They burned out a few Confederate cavalry pickets. They thought, as soldiers will, that they had seen the worst the war could show them. On the 20th of April, 1864, at the Battle of Plymouth in eastern North Carolina, a Confederate division under Brigadier General Robert F. Hoke broke the Union perimeter and overran the post. The 16th Connecticut, garrisoning Plymouth alongside the 85th New York and parts of 2 artillery batteries, surrendered as a regiment at 3 in the afternoon. Of the more than 400 Connecticut men captured that day, by various accounts, somewhere between half and 2/3 died in Southern prisons over the next 14 months. One of the heaviest regimental losses to captivity in the Union Army. They were sent to Andersonville on the 8th of May, 1864. They marched in through the north gate of the stockade on the 21st. Per the descriptive book of the 16th Connecticut, held in the compiled service records at the National Archives, the man in the cabinet card was 23 years old when he marched into Andersonville. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall. He had blue eyes, light brown hair, fair complexion, and a small white scar on the inside of his left wrist from a mill house accident before the war. He had been a finisher at a hat shop in Hartford. He had 2 younger sisters. He was unmarried, by the regimental clerk's notation, or rather, by then he had not been formally married. I will get to that. He was released on the 11th of April, 1865, along with about 600 other surviving Connecticut and New York prisoners from Andersonville, in the second wave of parole exchanges that followed the resumption of the cartel in January of that year. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox 2 days before. He did not know that yet. He was put on a steamer at the mouth of the Savannah River and brought up the coast to Camp Parole, outside Annapolis, Maryland, where the Christian Commission had been working alongside the Army Hospital in receiving paroled Union prisoners since the autumn of 1863. He arrived on the 7th of May. The cabinet card was made 1 week later. I have been looking for him for 21 years. I have not been looking for his name. I have his name. I have his service records. I have his pension file. I have the deed of gift his family signed in 1938 when they gave the cap and the daguerreotype and the cabinet card to the Connecticut Historical Society. I have, more or less, his life. What I have been looking for is the woman in the daguerreotype, because she is not in the deed of gift. She is not in the family papers that came with the donation. She is not in any letter he wrote home from before the war, of which the family preserved several. She is not in any letter he wrote from Andersonville, of which he was permitted to write 3. She is not in his pension file, in which he names his wife, and his wife is somebody else. She is not in any will, any census, any parish book I have found in 21 years of looking. And he carried her face under the leather of his cap through 247 days of starvation on the inside of one of the worst places human beings have ever made for other human beings. And he brought it out, and he set it back inside the cap before he sat for the photograph. That is the puzzle. That is what the cabinet card is asking. Why did a man who would be married to one woman for 38 years, who would name a daughter for that wife, who would be buried beside that wife in the Old North Cemetery in Hartford long after the war was a memory, why did that man, in May of 1865, in the worst week of his life, carry a daguerreotype of a different woman? And why did he keep her there? And who was she? And what happened to her? I have an answer. I have 3 answers, and they do not agree, and I'm going to give you all 3. Before I go on, I should tell you that we are about to walk through the period and the place. The newspapers of that week, the doors that opened on Maryland Avenue in Annapolis, the cornmeal ration in the stockade, the arithmetic of parole, the empty rooms in a hat shop on Pratt Street in Hartford. I will give you the world the photograph was made in. Then I will give you the investigation. Then I will tell you what I think happened. If any of this matters to you, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel and turn the bell on. Every video here works the same way. 1 real archival photograph and 1 detail and 1 life recovered. And the more of us asking these questions, the better the questions get. With that, let us go in. May 14th, 1865. A Sunday, Annapolis, Maryland. The town is half a war camp and half a county seat. And on this particular morning, the camp is winning. The bell at St. Anne's Episcopal Church on Church Circle is ringing the 8 o'clock service. From the harbor come the bells of the steamer Henry Burden, which docked at 6 with 81 paroled men from the lower Chesapeake, and which is being unloaded in shifts onto the planks at the West Street Wharf. There are army wagons on Main Street, an ambulance train waiting outside the Naval Academy gates. The Academy buildings have been an Army hospital for 3 years now, and will be one for 3 weeks more. And a long, slow file of men in cleaned, but ill-fitting blue, who are walking or being walked the half-mile uphill from the wharf to the receiving sheds at Camp Parole. The Maryland Republican of Saturday, May 13th, lists 841 men received at the camp the previous week. The Hartford Courant of the same week prints, in its Connecticut column under Returned Prisoners of War, a list of 112 names. The man in our cabinet card is the 47th on that list. His name is misspelled. Whitcomb is rendered Whitcomb. The Courant will correct it on the 18th. The studio of Whitmore and Bond is on West Street, 2 blocks up from the wharf, on the 2nd floor above a chandler's shop. William Whitmore had been in the photographic trade in Baltimore before the war and had opened the Annapolis branch in the autumn of '63 to catch the exchange traffic. By the spring of '65, he was running 2 operators and 2 cameras almost continuously. The going rate for a cabinet card was 75 cents the single, $4 the dozen. The Christian Commission, which paid for the portraits of paroled men who could not afford them, subsidized many of the cards that summer at 50 cents apiece, billed to the Commission's New York office. Per the Commission's records, the ledger sheets are in the Smithsonian's Archives of American Art, Whittemore and Bond billed for 193 subsidized portraits in May of 1865, 47 of them on the day our cabinet card was made. The studio book for that Sunday does not survive in full. Whittemore and Bond's commercial papers were destroyed in a fire at a Baltimore warehouse in 1883. What survives is the cabinet card itself. I have to read the rest backwards from what I can see in the image. Behind him is the painted balustrade. The light is from a north-facing skylight, which is what every wet plate studio of the period used, because the light is even and slow. The exposure was probably 12 seconds. He held still. He had been holding still for almost a year. At Andersonville, you sat against the stockade wall in any small patch of shadow you could find, and you did not move, because moving cost calories you did not have to spare. And he held still for the camera, the way a man holds still for a thrown stone. His face does not show the relief of being free. His face shows the practiced stillness of a man who had survived by not moving. In Hartford that Sunday, the Christ Church Cathedral on Main Street was holding a service of thanksgiving for the end of the war. Lincoln was a month dead. The morning crepe was still on the gas lamps along Main Street and would be there until late May by city ordinance. Per the Hartford Current of Monday, May 15th, the cathedral was full at all three services. The Connecticut Adjutant General's office had posted the parole list of the 16th on the courthouse railings on the Saturday morning. By the time of the 8 o'clock service on Sunday, half the families on the west side of the river knew that some of their men were coming home. The other half, the ones whose names were not on the railings, also knew. The man in the cabinet card was on the railings. The Whitcomb family on Pratt Street, west of Main, between the courthouse and the river, had been told on Saturday evening. The family in question was Elias Whitcomb Sr., the father, a hatter, Margaret Whitcomb, the mother, and two younger sisters, Phoebe and Emily, 15 and 12. The hat shop, F and E. Whitcomb, hatters, occupied the ground floor at 38 Pratt Street. The family rooms were above the shop. Per the United States Census of 1860, the household had 4 members. By the United States Census of 1870, the household will have 3. One person has been removed from the list, and it is not the man in the cabinet card. I will come back to that. The woman in the daguerreotype. I will tell you what I have come to believe about where her portrait was made before we go any further into the investigation. The format is a 6-plate, mounted under a brass mat with a stamped scroll border that I have placed by pattern matching to the work of a Hartford daguerreotypist named Augustus Trask, whose studio was at 51 Asylum Street between 1849 and 1856. Trask died of typhus in 57. His stock and equipment passed to his son-in-law Henry Trumbull, who closed the studio in 58. The mat is consistent with Trask's late-period work, 1854 or 1855. The woman, if she was 18 in 1855, would have been 28 in May of 65. If she was 19, 29. I will hold that estimate for a moment and come back to it. Camp Parole, on the Sunday in question, occupied roughly 140 acres a mile and a half west of the Annapolis town center, on the road that ran out toward what was then called the Forest of Anne Arundel. The camp had been built in 1863 under federal supervision and was, by May of 65, the principal receiving facility on the eastern seaboard for paroled and exchanged Union prisoners. It had 3 receiving sheds, a hospital of 238 beds, run jointly by the Army and the United States Sanitary Commission, a Christian Commission tent for prayer meetings and letter writing, 2 mess sheds, and a small bathhouse with 12 copper tubs heated by wood-fired boilers. The bathhouse had been built at Christian Commission expense in the autumn of 64, after one of the Commission's officers, Lemuel Moss, who would later write the Commission's official history, reported that the men coming off the boats needed more than the basic stations could give them. The Commission raised the money for the bathhouse through its New York office in a few weeks. It opened in November. This is where the man went, on his first morning at Camp Parole. He was bathed, his clothes were burned. He was issued the 4-button sack he wore in the cabinet card, the brogans, the trousers, the cap. He was weighed and measured. He was given 2 pounds of soft bread, a 1/4 pound of beef, and, by Christian Commission custom, a small printed card with the 23rd Psalm on one side and a blank space on the other for the soldier's mother's address. He was given a tin cup of coffee, which would have been the first coffee he had tasted since the spring of 64. The Christian Commission's records of soft bread distribution at Camp Parole for May of 65 record a total of 41,712 loaves issued. The receiving sheds had cycled 3,400 men through them that month, by the Commission's count. He was kept for 2 days under observation by a contract surgeon named Edward Pratt of Baltimore. Per Surgeon Pratt's daily report, these reports are in the Surgeon General's office records at the National Archives, Record Group 94, in a single-bound volume that covers Camp Parole from January to June of 65. Whitcomb was admitted on the 7th of May, weighed 90 pounds and 8 ounces, presented with chronic dysentery of about 4 months standing, secondary lung trouble of unclear origin, and moderate scorbutic gum and tooth condition. Pratt prescribed beef tea, fresh vegetables when available, milk, brandy in small doses for the dysentery, and rest. Whitcomb was kept on the convalescent ward for 3 days. On the 11th of May, he was discharged to the camp's general population and was paid a partial back pay draft of $43.20. He sat for the cabinet card on the 14th. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to take you to the 11th of August, 1864, in the southwest quadrant of the Andersonville stockade, in the heat of the worst week of the worst month of that camp's history. Because what happens in May of 65 does not make sense without it. Whitcomb is at this point in August 3 months and 20 days into his captivity. He weighs, by reconstruction from his entry weight and his exit weight and Pratt's notes on his condition, about 110 pounds. He has lost 40 pounds since Plymouth. The man who runs the prison, Captain Henry Wirtz of Swiss extraction, has just announced that the ration is being cut again, citing, by the surviving administrative correspondence of the prison, which is held in part in the captured Confederate records at the National Archives, exhaustion of the local supply. The ration that week is 1 pint of unbolted cornmeal per man per day, with no meat and no salt. One of the local mills that supplied the camp is broken. Repairs will not be complete until the 22nd. There are 33,000 men in the stockade. Of those 33,000 men, about 190 are Connecticut men of the 16th, of whom about 108 will survive to be paroled. Whitcomb messes with 5 other men. They are all 16th Connecticut. They have set up what the prisoners called a shebang, a low shelter of scrap blanket and stockade scrapwood, in the south-central quadrant about 30 yards from the deadline. The mess includes the corporal of the original squad, William Sturgis of New Britain. It includes a private named Adam Calkins, a Bristol farmer of 21, who will not survive. It includes 2 privates named Otis Foote and Henry Bidwell, both of Plainville, who will. It includes a drummer boy of 17 named Joseph Marsh of Hartford, who will die on the 12th of September of dysentery and exposure. The 5 mess together because at Andersonville, 1 ration could not feed 1 man. What 1 man could carry from the issue point and protect from the raiders and stretch through a day required at least 3 men working as a unit. Whitcomb's unit is 6. It is in this week that he sews the daguerreotype into the leather of the sweatband of his forage cap. I'm going to give you the version of why I think this is the case. I am going to do it carefully because I am working from a single set of family papers and from 1 corroborating letter, and the corroborating letter is from a witness who was not in Whitcomb's mess, but in a neighboring one. The letter is in the manuscript collection of the Connecticut Historical Society. It was written in March of 1868 by Otis Foote, who in 1868 was farming back in Plainville, and was addressed to a Hartford journalist named Edward Niles, who was preparing what would become the regimental history of the 16th Connecticut. Foote's letter is on a single sheet of foolscap. It is in his own hand, which is steady. It is, on its face, an answer to a list of questions Niles had sent him about the day-to-day arrangements at Andersonville. Foote answered, about the messes and the small things the men carried and how they kept them. Elias Whitcomb of our mess carried a daguerreotype of a young woman, which he had sewn into the lining of his cap. He did not, I believe, ever take it out. We did not ask, after the first week, who she was. We came to call her, when we spoke of her at all, Whitcomb's mother. He did not contradict us. That is the only contemporary mention of the daguerreotype. There is no other Andersonville-era reference to it that I have found, and I have looked very carefully. There is no letter from Whitcomb himself in which he mentions her, although 3 of his letters from the prison survive. They were censored letters, brief, on Confederate-issued forms, and they consist mostly of, I am well and do not send goods, they will not come through. There is no parental letter inquiring about her. There is no mention of her in his pension file, which is a thick file because Whitcomb collected an invalid's pension for 31 years on the grounds of permanent dysentery and lung damage incurred at Andersonville, and which contains affidavits and depositions and surgeons' reports running to about 300 pages. She is, in the record, only and entirely a face under a sweatband. Foote saw her once or did not see her at all, and called her Whitcomb's mother as a courtesy. I have stood at the cabinet of the Connecticut Historical Society in Hartford, and I have looked at the print under a 4-power loupe, and I have thought about what a man does on the 11th of August, 1864, in the southwest quadrant of Andersonville, with the small thing he must not lose. A small thing in Andersonville did not stay in a pocket. A small thing in Andersonville did not stay under a blanket. The raiders took it. The hunger took it. The dysentery took it, in the sense that a man bent over in the open latrine could not protect what was on him. There was one place a small thing might stay hidden, and that was on the head, under the band of the cap, against the crown, where the lice were thick enough that no man searched without strong reason. Whitcomb put her there. He carried her there for 247 days. The cornmeal, and I will say it again, I cannot prove this and I will not insist. The cornmeal got under the brass mat in the August heat when the sweat ran into the cap and a fleck of it lodged on the silvering of the plate, and it was still there when Ruth Adair examined the daguerreotype in 1963, 98 years later. Per the descriptive book of the 16th Connecticut, and per Surgeon Pratt's notes, and per the Christian Commission's printed 23rd Psalm card, which Whitcomb's family preserved, and which has Whitcomb's hand on the back, giving his mother's address as Pratt Street, Hartford. By these records, his mother's name was Margaret. The woman in the daguerreotype is not Margaret. Margaret would have been 48 in May of 65, and there is a separate cabinet card of Margaret Whitcomb in the family papers, taken in 1873, in which a much older woman with a different face and a different hairline sits at a parlor table. The woman under the sweatband is not the same woman. The Christian Commission card, and Otis Foote's letter, and the cabinet card and the daguerreotype are the 4 pieces I have. The 5th piece is the empty row in the 1870 census. The 6th piece is the entry in a Hartford parish book that I will get to in a moment. I have stood at the grave in the Old North Cemetery in Hartford. The stone is dated 1936, the year of his own death, the year his wife of 38 years, who had outlived him by no one and predeceased him by 32, was already lying beside the empty plot they had bought together. He died in 1936. The stone gives the dates and the names and the regimental affiliation. It does not, as stones do not, give the names of those who were almost there. In a moment, I'm going to turn from the prison and the camp and tell you about Hartford in September of 64, about a young woman walking to a hat shop on Pratt Street, and about a black ribbon being unpinned from a straw bonnet on a kitchen table because somebody's father said it was too early to wear it. That is, in my judgment, the moment at which the photograph in this story actually begins. The photograph that ended up in the leather of the cap began earlier, in 1855, in Augustus Trask's studio at 51 Asylum Street. But the story of why a man under a sweatband would not let her go for 247 days, that story, I think, begins in Hartford on the 14th of September, 1864. I will take you there next. The 14th of September, 1864, a Wednesday, Hartford, Connecticut. The telegraph at the Adjutant General's office in the state capitol on Capitol Hill chattered most of the morning. The men on duty that week were Sergeant John Halsey, a 50-year-old veteran of the Mexican War turned clerk, and a young woman named Margaret Beach, who had been hired in 1863 because the war had taken too many men out of clerks' positions, and the office could not function without her. Beach was reading off the wire, and Halsey was sorting the returns. Between 9 and noon, they entered the names of 41 Connecticut men confirmed as dead or missing in the Confederate prisons in the previous fortnight. 12 were 16th Connecticut. The list went, by previous arrangement with the Hartford Courant, downstairs to the front desk at the state capitol, where a runner from the Courant collected it at 1:15 noon. The Courant set the type in the afternoon. The evening edition went out at 5. The list ran on page 2 under From the Rebel Prisons, Latest Confirmations. It was alphabetized. The 8th entry between Whipple and Wilson read, Whitcomb, Elias, Private, Company H, 16th Connecticut. Captured Plymouth, North Carolina, April 20th. Reported in confinement, Andersonville, Georgia. Further unknown. The Whitcomb household subscribed to the Current. The paper was delivered to the back door of the hat shop at 38 Pratt Street by a boy named Henry Gates, who was 13 and worked the West End route from 4 in the afternoon until the last paper was off the wagon. He delivered the Whitcomb paper at 20 minutes past 5 on the 14th of September, 1864. Margaret Whitcomb read the list at the kitchen table. The shop was still open downstairs. Elias Sr. was finishing a felt hat for a Hartford lawyer. Phoebe, 15, was on the stairs with her schoolbooks. Emily, 12, was at the kitchen table doing the dishes from supper. Margaret read the column and set the paper down on her lap and did not say anything for some time. Phoebe came down to ask what was for supper, and Margaret told her to go and tell her father. What I am about to describe I am reconstructing from 3 sources. One is a letter from Phoebe Whitcomb, written in 1916 at the age of 67, to a regional historian compiling oral histories of the Hartford home front. The letter is in the Connecticut State Library's Civil War Manuscripts collection. The second is the surviving diary of a Hartford milliner named Sarah Trumbull, who lived 2 doors down at 34 Pratt Street, and who recorded in her diary that evening, "Mrs. Whitcomb's eldest in the prison news tonight. The family taking it hard. The eldest girl walking to the river after supper." The third is the parish register of Center Church on Main Street, in which an entry I have not yet been able to fully match is dated the same week. I will get to that. The 3 sources, taken together, are enough to say what happened. Elias Sr. came up from the shop in his apron. He read the column once. He sat down at the table. The Whitcombs had been told in May, when the regiment was first reported missing at Plymouth, that confinement at one of the larger Confederate prisons was likely. They had hoped Richmond. Richmond meant Libby and Belle Isle, and the city itself, which had medicine, and which had clergy, and which was, by report, exchangeable. They had not let themselves say Andersonville, although by September of '64, the word was already in the Hartford papers. The first long Current report on Andersonville had run on the 17th of August. It had described the camp as an open stockade in the interior, with no shelter and a polluted stream, where rations are short and where the death rate is now believed to exceed 100 per day. The Whitcombs had read the August report. They had not discussed it. Now Elias Sr. asked his wife what she wanted to do. She said she did not know. She asked him what he wanted to do. He said the right thing was to wait. The Adjutant General's office, he said, would have a fuller report in a week or 2. The list said further unknown. That meant alive on the date of the last list and unconfirmed since. It did not mean dead. Phoebe Whitcomb, in her 1916 letter, wrote, "Father then said something I have not forgotten. He said, 'Margaret, do not put the crepe on yet. It is too early. He may yet come home.' My mother had a black ribbon, which she had taken out of a drawer that afternoon and laid on the kitchen sideboard, and she had been about to pin it to her straw bonnet. Father took the ribbon from the sideboard and folded it twice and put it in the inner pocket of his waistcoat. He kept it there until the next May. Phoebe goes on to write that her sister Emily said nothing at all that evening, but went to bed at 7 instead of 9, and that she herself, Phoebe, walked down Pratt Street to the river at about 7:15, alone, and stood on the embankment for some time looking at the water. I did not pray," she writes. "I had not the words. I watched the river. I watched a heron in the shallows. The heron stood still for a long time and then it moved. I thought, that is what we must do." A black mourning ribbon in 1864 Hartford cost between 8 and 12 cents the yard at the millinery shops on Main Street, depending on the weight of the silk. The Hartford Current of August 24th lists the going rate at 10 cents the yard, plain crepe, 16 cents the yard, French crepe. Margaret Whitcomb had bought enough for a hat band and a sleeve and the news of her son. She had laid it on the sideboard. Her husband had folded it and put it in his pocket and asked her to wait. She waited. I tell you this because the 8th month of waiting was the worst, and because the man under the sweatband at Andersonville did not know that his mother had been told he was missing, and because the Christian Commission's 23rd Psalm card, with his mother's address in his hand, given to him on the 7th of May, 1865, at Camp Parole was, when he wrote on it, the first letter that would reach Pratt Street that anyone could trust. There's a small thing in the surviving card. On the back, after the address in pencil, in Whitcomb's hand, "She will know to take it off. I've looked at that card many times. I'm still not certain what it means. I'm going to turn now to the woman in the daguerreotype, because the question of who she is has been with us since the beginning of this story. And I have, as I told you, 3 answers, and I will give you all 3. I will tell you which one I think is right and how much I trust myself on it. I will tell you which ones are documented, which are only family memory, and which are my own guess. I will not pretend to certainty I do not have. The first version, she is Mary Calkins of Bristol, Connecticut, born about 1836. This is the most documented version. There is a Mary Calkins in the Bristol birth records of 1836, daughter of Asa and Lucy Calkins. There is a Mary Calkins in the 1855 Bristol enumeration, as a young woman in domestic service in the household of a Hartford machinist named Brace, residing at the time on Asylum Street, 3 blocks from Augustus Trask's studio at 51 Asylum. There is a Mary Calkins who, per the parish register of the Bristol Congregational Church, married a Bristol man named Wright on the 12th of November, 1855. She would have been 19 at the time. The studio mat on the daguerreotype is consistent with Trask's work of 54 or 55. The young woman in the image looks about 18. The trouble with this version is that Mary Calkins Wright died on the 3rd of February, 1860, in childbed at Bristol. She is buried at the Forestville Cemetery. The Bristol Congregational Church Register records her death in the death of her infant son. She was 23. Adam Calkins, the Bristol private who messed with Whitcomb at Andersonville and who died there in October of 64, was her younger brother. He would have been 15 when she died. So under this version, the woman in the daguerreotype is a woman who has been dead since 1860, and the daguerreotype is something Whitcomb either carried for Adam Calkins or carried because Mary Calkins meant something to him in 1855, when he was a hat shop apprentice of 14, and she was a domestic of 19, working on Asylum Street, or both. I do not know which. The version is supported by parish records on both ends, by the mat, by the age, by the connection of Brother Adam in the Andersonville mess. The version is weakened by silence. There is no surviving letter, no inscription on the back of the daguerreotype, and the back of the daguerreotype, per Ruth Adair's 1963 examination, was inscribed only with a single penciled letter, possibly M, possibly a sloppy W, on the paper backing inside the case. There is no mention of Mary Calkins Wright in Whitcomb's pension file. There is no mention in the Bristol Calkins family papers, which I have looked at in the Bristol Historical Society, and which include a small box of letters from Adam Calkins in the Army, none of which reference the daguerreotype or his sister. Adam Calkins, by his surviving letters, was a chatty boy who wrote home about the rations, the rain, the chaplain, and the religious revival at City Point in August of '63. He did not write about his sister. He did not write about Whitcomb's cap. The second version. She is Margaret Maggie Holloway of Hartford, born about 1837, daughter of a Hartford printer who set type for the Hartford Times. This is the family memory version. It comes through the second cousin of the Whitcomb line, a Mrs. Cora Whitcomb Halsey, who in 1928 gave a brief oral interview to a Hartford amateur historian named Charles Boardman Hawes. Hawes was not a careful interviewer. He took notes. He did not record dates or pose follow-up questions. His notes are in the Connecticut Historical Society file. The relevant entry reads, in his hand, Mrs. Halsey says the cap photograph is of a Maggie Holloway, who lived on Asylum Street and was a daughter of a printer for the Times, and who Elias was fond of as a young man. Mrs. Halsey says Maggie went west, did not come back, was not heard of. There is a Margaret Holloway in the 1850 Hartford enumeration, age 13, in a household at 64 Asylum Street, with a father whose occupation is given as printer. The household appears again in 1855 City Directory, then disappears from Hartford between 55 and 60. There is no further trace of Margaret Holloway in any Hartford record I have located. Mrs. Halsey's went west is plausible. Many Connecticut families in the late 50s followed kin out to Wisconsin or Iowa or the new Kansas territory. It is also possible Margaret Holloway married and changed her name and is alive in a record I have not yet found. I have written to the Iowa State Historical Society and to the Wisconsin Historical Society and to the State Library of Iowa, 3 times each, over 15 years, with no result. The version is supported by the family memory in the line, by the Asylum Street address consistent with Augustus Trask's studio, by the age in 1855, by the name beginning with M on the paper backing. It is weakened by the absence of any independent paper record and by the fact that Mrs. Halsey was, by 1928, 73 years old and was speaking of events 60 years past and may have conflated names. Hawes notes nothing else of her account. The third version is mine. I will say it now, and I will say it with as little force as I can. I do not insist on it. I think the woman in the daguerreotype is Mary Calkins Wright. I do not think the daguerreotype was Whitcomb's originally. I think it was Adam Calkins's, and that Adam carried it from Bristol into the regiment as his sister's portrait, and that when Adam Calkins began to fail at Andersonville in late September of '64, he gave it to Whitcomb to keep, because Whitcomb was carrying it under his cap already, by Otis Foote's account, and because the cap under the lice and the sweatband was the only safe place in the camp for a small thing. I think Adam Calkins asked Whitcomb to bring it home to Bristol. I think Whitcomb tried to and could not. The Calkins house at Bristol was empty in 1865. Asa Calkins had died in 1863. Lucy had returned to her father's house at Burlington. The Bristol house was sold to a Whitmore family in March of '65. Whitcomb went home to Hartford with the cap. He kept the cap. He kept the daguerreotype in the cap. He did not name it. He did not show it. He did not tell his wife. I think the small white stain on the silvering is cornmeal, as I have said. I think the cornmeal is Adam Calkins's cornmeal, from August of '64, when the local mills were broken and the ration was 1 pint of unbolted meal a day, because Adam Calkins handled the daguerreotype in his own hands during that week, before he gave it to Whitcomb. This third version is supported by Foote's letter, by Adam Calkins's confirmed presence in the Whitcomb mess, by the brother-sister relation, by the studio mat, by the date of the original portrait, by the Hartford service residence of Mary Calkins on Asylum Street in the year the daguerreotype was made, by the silence of the official record on Whitcomb's side, and by the cornmeal stain. It is weakened by being unprovable. It is weakened by depending on the conjecture that Whitcomb did not destroy the cap or the daguerreotype after returning home, and on the further conjecture that he kept them all his life out of an obligation that he never wrote down. I cannot prove that. I cannot prove that he did not destroy the cap and that the cap that came to the Connecticut Historical Society in 1938 had been kept by him for 70 years for any other reason than the absent-mindedness of an old man. What I can say is this. In 1938, when the deed of gift was signed, the donor, Whitcomb's daughter, Mrs. Frances Whitcomb Carter of West Hartford, his only surviving child, wrote a letter to the curator of the Connecticut Historical Society that accompanied the gift. The letter is short. It says, "Enclosed are the cabinet card, the cap, and the carte de visite-sized image that belonged to my father, Elias Whitcomb, of the 16th Connecticut. He kept them together always. He asked before he died that they go to the society together, and that they be kept together, and that no one separate them. He gave no further instructions. We have honored his wishes as best we can. She does not say what the daguerreotype is or who it is of. She gives the Whitcomb family's permission for the items to be displayed, but not for the daguerreotype to be removed from the cap. The instruction has been honored for 87 years. I have stood in the Connecticut Historical Society reading room, and I have read that letter many times. I have walked the 4 blocks west from the Society to Pratt Street, where the hat shop used to be. There is now a brick office building on the site, dating from 1906. And I have stood at the curb and I have thought about a 13-year-old paperboy named Henry Gates, putting the Hartford Courant on the back step on the 14th of September, 1864, and about Margaret Whitcomb reading the column and laying a black ribbon on the sideboard, and her husband folding it and putting it in his waistcoat. I have walked to the Old North Cemetery and I have stood at the grave. The stone gives the name and the dates and the regiment and the words Andersonville, 1864. It does not give Mary Calkins's name. I do not know which version is right. I have given them to you with what I have. In the last part of this video, I'm going to tell you what I think happened to Elias Whitcomb after May of 1865, why I think the daguerreotype stayed in the cap for 70 years, and what I think the family in 1938 understood about it, and what they did not. The 4th of June, 1865. Hartford Station, Asylum Street platform. The train comes in from New Haven at 20 minutes after 4 in the afternoon, an hour late on account of a crossing accident at Berlin. Whitcomb is in the second-to-last car. He is wearing the 4-button sack from Camp Parole, the brogans, the trousers, the cap. The cabinet card is in his coat pocket, in a paper envelope from the Whitmore and Bond studio with his name on it in the operator's hand. He has been 3 weeks on the road north, out of Annapolis on the 17th of May by steamer to Baltimore, by rail from Baltimore to Philadelphia, by ferry across the Delaware to Camden, by rail across New Jersey to Jersey City, by ferry to Manhattan. 4 days in a Christian Commission soldier's lodging house on Worth Street, while he waited for back pay paperwork. By rail from 27th Street to New Haven, then up to Hartford. He has spent 98 cents on food in 3 weeks. He has used the rest of the $43 draft from Camp Parole to pay for the steamer and the rail tickets. His father is on the platform. His mother is not. She's at the hat shop. They had been told on Friday by telegram that he would be in on Sunday afternoon. They had been told on Saturday morning by a second telegram that the train was delayed. Margaret had not gone to the platform because she could not stand to. Elias Sr. had walked from Pratt Street at 3. He had stood by the parcel office. He had been there an hour. I am reconstructing this from Phoebe Whitcomb's 1916 letter and from the timetables of the New York and New Haven Railroad for the week of June 1st, 1865, which are in the railroad's bound papers at the Connecticut State Library. Phoebe was on the platform too. She was 15. She wrote in 1916, "When the carriage came in, I did not at first know him. He was a small man under a cap I did not recognize. My father knew him. My father went to him before he was off the step, and he put his arms around him, and they did not move for some time. My father had his face against my brother's shoulder, and I could see only the back of my brother's head in the cap. I thought, that is a very dirty cap. I was angry at the cap. I do not know why. He walked the half-mile home with his father. He had been weighed at Camp Parole on the 7th of May at 90 pounds and 8 ounces. He weighed, by his own later account on a pension affidavit, 96 pounds at Hartford Station on the 4th of June. He had gained 5 pounds in 28 days. His mother met him in the back kitchen. She did not faint and did not weep. She set out bread and milk and a small dish of stewed apples and told him to eat slowly. She had been told by a Hartford surgeon in May, when she had asked, that the men who came back from the prisons were destroyed by the food they craved most, and that bread and milk and apples, for the first month, was the only safe thing. She fed him bread and milk and stewed apples for 31 days. He took off the cap at the back kitchen table and laid it on the windowsill. He kept it on the windowsill in his room until December. In December, he moved it to a small carved walnut box his father gave him, which had been used in the shop for finished hat trims, and which he kept on the top of his clothes press for the rest of his life. The cap was in the box. The cabinet card was in the box. The daguerreotype was in the cap. He did not take it out. He did not show it. He did not, by the family's account, ever explain what it was. I will tell you what he did next. On the 2nd of January, 1866, in Center Church on Main Street, Hartford, he married a young woman named Catherine Pratt of Plainville, aged 22, daughter of a foundry master. Catherine was a friend of Phoebe Whitcomb's. She had met Elias for the first time on the 3rd of October, 1865, at a Sabbath supper at the Whitcomb house, and she would later say, per a letter she wrote to her sister in 1873, that he was the quietest man I had ever sat across from at table. And I knew on that first night that he was the man I would marry, and that I would have to wait a long time before he could find his way to telling me so. They were married for 38 years. They had 3 children. 2 daughters survived to adulthood, Frances and Anna. A son, Elias Pratt Whitcomb, died of measles in 1871 at the age of 3. Catherine died in 1904. Frances married a Hartford insurance lawyer named Carter. Anna married a clergyman and went to Pennsylvania. Elias Whitcomb died on the 17th of November, 1936, at home on Whitney Street, of complications of chronic bronchitis incurred, the death certificate notes, in Confederate confinement, 1,864. He worked after his recovery in the hat shop on Pratt Street until 1878, when his father died, and he sold the business to a Hartford hatter named Gould. He bought a small bookkeeping practice and worked as a bookkeeper for a Hartford insurance company until he retired in 1916. He served from 1872 until his death as the recording secretary of the 16th Connecticut Regimental Association. He kept the minute book in his own hand, and he attended every annual reunion until 1931, when he was 89, and the journey to Hartford from his sister Phoebe's house in West Hartford became too much. The minute book is in the Connecticut State Library, 12 volumes, in his hand, neat and steady. There is no entry in any volume that mentions Adam Calkins. There is no entry that mentions the cap. He did, in 1893, write a brief memoir of his Andersonville confinement at the request of the Regimental Association. It is 6 pages. It is in the minute book at the back of Volume 7. It describes the march from Plymouth, the journey to Andersonville, the conditions of the stockade, the mess arrangements, the death of Joseph Marsh in September of '64, the death of William Sturgis in February of '65, the death of 3 other 16th Connecticut men whom he names. It does not name Adam Calkins. It does not mention the cap. It does not mention the daguerreotype. It ends with the words, "I came out. The men I have named did not. There is no more to say." He kept the cap in the walnut box for 70 years. In 1938, his daughter Frances Whitcomb Carter, then 65, widowed, living on Farmington Avenue in West Hartford, wrote the letter I read you in the last part. She gave the cap, the daguerreotype, and the cabinet card to the Connecticut Historical Society. She did so, the letter says, in compliance with my father's last wishes. She did not say what those wishes were. She did not say what she understood the daguerreotype to be. She did not, in any subsequent correspondence with the Society, and there are 3 further letters on practical matters of the gift, refer to the daguerreotype again. I have asked the Connecticut Historical Society twice over the years whether the family ever, in any private communication, identified the woman. The answer is no. Frances Whitcomb Carter died in 1946. Her sister Anna died in 1943. Neither left papers that referred to the daguerreotype. The line from the male side ended with Elias's son, who died at 3. The daughters had children, but the grandchildren of Elias Whitcomb, whom I have located, 3 of them, all in their late 80s and 90s when I spoke with them in 2004, did not know there was a daguerreotype. They knew of the cap. They had been told as children that grandfather brought it back from the prison. They had not been told what was inside. So why did he keep it? That is the last question. I will tell you what I think, and I will tell you what I cannot prove. I think he kept it because he could not bring it back to Bristol. I think he tried, once, in the summer of 1865, and found the Calkins house gone and Lucy Calkins at her father's in Burlington, and he could not bring himself to go to Burlington with a daguerreotype of a dead sister-in-law and an account of how the daguerreotype had been kept by a brother under his cap in the camp where the brother had died. The Calkins family, by what I have been able to find, did not know that Adam Calkins had even messed with the 16th Connecticut men. They received only the standard adjutant's letter. Adam died of dysentery on the 17th of October, 1864, at Andersonville, particulars not known. They did not write to Whitcomb.